I presume the image people have of bears will differ depending on where they are from. People living in areas where bears only exist in zoos will probably image these cute, cuddly creatures being something like large dogs, because this is how they are often depicted in media and culture. But those of you who live in areas where wild bears exist are well aware this is far from the truth. Bears are capable of easily killing an adult human and should not be taken lightly. The story I will present to you today is the worst bear attack in Japanese history, where a village was ravaged by a wild bear, resulting in 10 dead and 3 injured. This was no ordinary bear. It was over 3.5 meters, or 12 feet tall when standing upright on its rear legs, weighing 340 kilograms or 750 pounds, far larger than the average size of its species. This bear terrorized the village for several days, and hundreds of men were gathered in an attempt to take it down. This is the story of the Sankebetsu brown bear incident. The story takes place in the winter of 1915 on Japan's northern island of Hokkaido. Most parts of Hokkaido during the early 20th century was somewhat of a frontier. Consider it like the Wild West of Japan. People would live off the land, and their houses would be primitive structures made out of a wood frame and straw walls. In November, a man living in the village of Sankebetsu notices rustling sounds outside, and hears his horses cry out in the middle of the night. He assumes some kind of wild animal was visiting his property and didn't think much of it, as encounters with wild animals, including bears, was fairly common in Hokkaido during this period in time. As the sun rose the next day, the man steps outside to assess the situation. Some of the corn he had stored for the winter had been eaten, confirming his assumptions that a wild animal had passed by. What caught his attention was a footprint left behind by this animal. It was that of a bear, and a massive one at that, far larger than any footprint the man had seen in his lifetime. Japanese brown bears typically hibernate during winter, but this is not always the case. For example, if a bear feels it didn't eat enough before going into hibernation, it may stay awake to avoid starving in its sleep. In this case, bears will be hungry and extremely aggressive. So a wild bear, especially an abnormally large one, wandering around your village in winter, is a major risk to the residents. This bear could eat your food supplies, your livestock, and in the worst case may attack humans. The village of Sankebetsu stationed a few men with hunting experience near the house where the bear was spotted, to put it down if it would appear again. Indeed, on the night of November 30th, the bear came back. The hunters managed to score a grazing hit, but because it was dark and at long range, they failed to secure a lethal shot, and the bear escaped into the night. A couple weeks later, on December 9th, a local lumberjack named Saburo came back home around noon to have lunch with his family before he left for work again in the afternoon. As he enters his house, he finds it odd no one is there to greet him. His wife Mayu and his orphan son Mikio should be at home during this time of day. He then notices Mikio in a seating position facing away from him in the main room and assumes he is asleep. In an attempt to surprise his son, Saburo sneaks up from behind and pats him on the back. But it was Saburo who ended up receiving the surprise. As he touches Mikio, he realizes his son's lifeless body is ice cold, drenched in blood, and his head is almost entirely ripped off from his body. In a panic, Saburo runs to the other villagers and calls for help. As the men of the village gather around at his house, they notice a window has been destroyed, and some strands of long hair are caught on the window frame, presumably the hair of Saburo's wife, Mayu. As the men examine the scene, it appears Mikio had been killed instantly by a strike to the head and neck, which almost tore his head clean off, and he just so happened to land in the seating position Saburo found him in. Mayu was likely dragged out the window, which is why strands of her hair were found stuck to the window frame. She was presumably still alive, as there were signs she had used various items in the house to fight back against the bear. Saburo wanted to go search for his wife immediately, but the sun had already set, and the other men convinced him it was futile to go out at night. They would send a search party first thing tomorrow morning. As the sun rose the next day, a dozen or so men were gathered to track down the bear, and it didn't take them long to find it. They ran into the bear only a few hundred meters from the village. Seeing it up close in daylight made the villagers realize how large this particular bear was. It was 3.7 meters when standing upright on its hind legs, weighing around 340 kilograms or 750 pounds. To give you a sense of scale, 3.7 meters is roughly the height of a large elephant, more than twice the height of an average man. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This story took place over 100 years ago. Surely the villagers were exaggerating the size of this bear, or the story became exaggerated over time. However, it is likely that the claims are accurate, as this is recorded in official documents by the local government. Also, in 2015, a 400-kilogram brown bear was caught in northern Japan, which is even larger than the bear that appears in this story. So it definitely is possible for this species to grow to this size. Coming back to our story, the hunters immediately raised their rifles as they encountered this bear, and pulled the triggers. But due to the rifles being poorly maintained, most of them malfunctioned, and only one of them was able to produce an actual shot, which missed. The single gunshot did manage to scare the bear, which ran away deeper into the forest. As the hunters scavenged the area, they found Mayu, or what was left of her. One of her legs, a portion of her crushed skull and face, and other random chunks of meat. The bear had partially buried her body parts in the snow, presumably to save for eating later. The villagers decide to bring her remains back home for a funeral, not knowing that this decision would become a fatal mistake. On the evening of that day, a small funeral was being held for Saburo's wife Mayu and his son Mikio. There were only 9 participants because people had heard the news of a wild bear running around, and they were hesitant to participate in the funeral from fear of the bear coming back. Their concerns would turn out to be proven true, as during the funeral, the bear literally comes crashing through the wall, smashing the coffin of Mayu and Mikio in a frenzied rage. Bears are extremely territorial creatures. From the bear's perspective, Mayu's corpse belonged to him, and the villagers had stolen it. So the bear had come to take back what was his. Obviously, there was a lot of screaming involved, so people who lived nearby rushed to help. Some of them fired rifles, and although no one scored a hit, the gunshots scared the bear away back into the forest. By this point, the villagers were terrified, and those living near the Saburo residence decided to stay at the houses of other villagers living a reasonable distance away. One of the houses people took refuge in was the residence of the Meike family, located roughly 500 meters from the Saburo residence. A total of 11 people, 4 adults and 7 children, were spending the night at this house. One of the adult women was pregnant, so that would make the total number 12 if you count her unborn child. Bears have an extremely strong sense of smell, superior than that of dogs, and can easily track down humans within a 500-meter radius. Unfortunately for the Meike family and their friends, the bear chose this house as its next target. Sometime during the night, the bear charged into the house and it was simply a massacre. Children running around in panic, while the adults tried their best to save them. When the dust settled, a total of 5 lives were lost, including the pregnant woman and her unborn child. It is said that this pregnant woman displayed the most courage, standing between the children and the bear with a torch in hand, attempting to drive the bear away. But no human can fend off a bear of this size, and in her final moments, she begged the bear to kill her with a strike to the head or neck, and avoid her stomach. Sadly, bears do not understand human words, nor do they have a concept of mercy, so the bear crushed her head and then literally ripped the fetus out of her stomach, which was found laying on the ground. Local authorities took the matter seriously and a few days later on December 12th, a group of some few dozen men from the local police force were gathered to assist in taking this bear down. But these men were police officers, not hunters. They had no skill or expertise in tracking down a wild animal, so a plan was devised to bring the bear to them. As I previously mentioned, bears are extremely territorial and consider the prey they have hunted down to be their property. Exploiting this behavior of bears, the police team proposed using the bodies of those killed in the Meike residence as bait to lure the bear out. Obviously, there was some resistance from the villagers against using the corpses of their family and friends, but eventually it was agreed that it was a necessary sacrifice to take care of the bear and keep the village safe. The corpses of the victims were gathered in the same house Mayu and Mikyu's funeral was held at. The police team hid around the house, waiting for the bear to fall into their trap. Sometime in the afternoon the bear did appear, but it may have sensed something was up, as it observed the house from afar, but eventually disappeared back into the forest, giving the police no chance to take it down. The following day authorities would ramp up their efforts. Soldiers would be called in from the army, along with numerous volunteers from surrounding villages, totaling in a few hundred men. They would now take the fight to the bear and sweep the forest using overwhelming numbers. Among them was a man named Yamamoto Heikichi, a bear hunter of legendary status who would kill over 300 bears during his lifetime. A veteran of the war between Japan and Russia, he was known to use the Russian bolt-action rifle he scavenged from the battlefield to hunt bears. Rumors say Yamamoto had killed a bear with just a butcher knife when he was younger, and he was nicknamed Yamamoto the Butcher. The hunting party, which was now an army of hundreds of men, trekked into the forest, and although they had a brief encounter and scored a hit, could not deliver the killing blow. Yamamoto, on the other hand, preferred to operate alone. While the other men were lumbering around in large groups, Yamamoto found the blood trail left behind by the now injured bear, and silently followed it into the forest. Near the summit of a hill, Yamamoto found the bear leaning against a tree. He closed the distance, making sure to stay downwind to not alert the bear of his presence. Once he got within 20 meters, he took his shot. The first shot hit the bear in the chest. The bear turned around and stood up on its hind legs, bringing it to its full height. Yamamoto did not panic and put the second shot directly between the eyes, finally putting an end to the bear that had terrorized this town. The carcass was dragged back to the village, where an autopsy was performed. A few articles of clothing were found in the digestive tract that did not belong to the villagers, and further investigation found that it belonged to 3 women who had been found brutally killed near a river a few days before the incident. This brought the total kill count of this particular bear to 10. This incident was widely unknown to the public until much later in the 20th century, when an article was published about it, and since then has been portrayed in movies, manga, and eventually became popularized through the internet. Nowadays, when Japanese people think of bears killing humans, this is one of the first stories that come to mind, along with the Fukuoka University incident, which I also have a video on, so please check it out if you're interested. An interesting after-story of this incident is that one of the boys who survived the Meike resident massacre, Okawa Haruyoshi, would grow up to become a famous bear hunter himself. Mentored directly by Yamamoto, he would hunt down over 100 bears, and along with other contributors constructed a memorial for people who were killed due to bear attacks. On December 9, 1985, exactly 70 years after the incident, Okawa was about to give a speech on his life to a local elementary school. Just as he got on stage, he fainted and passed away a few hours later. Some people rumored that this was a curse set upon him by all the bears he had killed. Okawa himself often claimed that it was not the bears that were at fault. It was the humans that were invading on their territory. Whether it was curse or coincidence, it is a bizarre tangent to this story. In 1990, a recreation of this incident was made near the location it took place. It's in the middle of nowhere, so I doubt any of you will actually go there. But something I found interesting is if you go to the website of this recreation, it warns visitors to be wary of wild bears that roam the area. Thank you for watching until the end. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next video. I'll see you next time.